So please give your attention to Rabbi Lipskar, who is joining us remotely. But like I said today, remotely is actually, so therefore Rabbi Lipskar is with us, and we're all together tonight on this holy day of Yud Shvat. Rabbi Lipskar.
Yom Tov, everyone. L'chaim. L'chaim. Very special day. You might say on some level, even though because we're not on that level of how the Rebbe refers to the concept of histalkus as having evidently more presence than before. So nonetheless, this day seems to be somewhat has some elements of bittersweet because we very significantly miss the physical presence of the Rebbe as he directed us through this dark exile towards redemption. But it's equally significant, particularly, and to me personally as well, that this Farbrengen is held in conjunction with a project for release time. The release time, besides the fact, or on top, or together with the fact that it was the first basic movement of outreach of the Rebbe after his appointment by the previous Rebbe to lead the organizations of Chabad that addressed the public, like America's Le'nyanei Chinuch and Machne Yisrael and Kehos, publishing house, the outreach house, the educational process, his particular initial interest significantly and completely in comportment with the Rebbe's general philosophy and outlook on life were children, Jewish children, people who themselves were not able to address their own needs. Adults, you have to direct them, you can tell them, teach them, advertise to them. Particularly, they have communication skills, reading, etc. Children, them, you have to actually give them what they need from their primary, earliest infancy. The expectant child eats what the mother eats, always dependent, and thereafter. And without care on their spiritual souls, these children would be lost in a way that in some fashion, and I don't mean this directly, and not this time is not the conversation for it, but in some fashion, the demise of the spiritual identity and self is worse than the demise of the physical body in a way. And the Rebbe took it upon himself to wake up these beautiful children and to allow the godly presence that was instilled in them by inheritance from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to flourish and to grow and to be nurtured and to become participants in the Jewish people in a meaningful way. I know its impact because when I came to 770 in 1964, I started right away being part of the release time every Wednesday afternoon. We would be given time off from our Seder of learning. We would leave the yeshiva approximately 1:30, was a little bit into the afternoon Seder before, actually, morning. And we would go by bus to the public schools, and we would pick up children on the buses and then transport them to the closest shul in the area that would give permission to have these classes. And I remember myself going myself with a few other bachrim to be helpful in that way, because thank God we went to Sheepshead Bay, and there were many Jews that lived in that environment. And before the release time, the way we did it was we would go out, each of us, with a whole group of guys together. When public school started and the parents were enrolling, would stand outside the public school within given number of feet that you were allowed to stand in order of separation of church and state, to be able to give out flyers about the release time. Try to make the most colorful flyers. This is 1964, not 2021, when you have all the machinations to make the most beautiful flyers right away. These were done, like they say, by the Rebbe's Leifer. The Rebbe's Leifer was a man who used a mimeograph machine to run off copies of the Rebbe's talks. So we would use the Rebbe's Leifer, or one of the machines at the National Center for Jewish Education for Children under Rabbi Hecht. He first was in one part of Eastern Parkway, then a small, bigger space. That was our role. And in that particular group, I have to tell you that we had every single week over 150 Jewish children, boys and girls. 150 Jewish children. Nobody cared about them. Nobody thought about them. Nobody worried about them. They didn't have a spiritual parent. The Rebbe told his Talmidim, for whose time he was very careful on the Talmidim's time. On many levels, you can have there many stories about how the Rebbe was extremely, very strict about the Bachrim, the students, maintaining the proper order of learning in the proper times, and particularly for that time was given off in a way that was given extreme, very much encouragement by the Rebbe. And I can only imagine, because I've heard of so many young Jews that I've met myself, who today are shluchim and came from release time 30, 40 years ago. So it's a big honor for me to participate in the Farbrengen and dedicated to this project, particularly as the Rebbe's first project, so it means something. And always kol ascholas kosher, the beginnings, as we will talk about in a few minutes, just for a few minutes as well, about the Rebbe's opening statement to his acceptance of world leadership, his state of the world address, so to speak, Basi Lagani, Hasidic treatise. But particularly when you look at the Rebbe's influence of the early periods and what he took a special interest in was the concept of not losing a single Jewish child. And a Jewish child, the Rebbe stressed many times, is not only a child on the passport in terms of chronological age, but a child in terms of knowledge. You can be a 70-year-old with the knowledge of a 5-year-old, and even less could be. So we have a great mission before us, and I want to applaud the continuing influence of Rabbi Hecht through his children to maintain this extraordinary program and to grow it. I would think it has to be grown exponentially. Actually, to tell you the very truth, and probably you'll laugh at me, you'll say, what right do you have to say that? How much money are you giving? Whatever the case is. But this program of the Rebbe that has the potential to spread and to save literally tens of thousands of Jewish children on a regular basis, literally tens of thousands. You should be making a campaign for at least $3 million, not $300,000. And I mean that. I'm not making this as a joke and saying it lightly. I'm talking about the practicality of what's necessary today and the kind of strides that we need to take to make it happen, because we have the capacity and all the tools have been given to us. And if it's used in social communications and other garbage stuff, it can be definitely used to be able to touch more Jewish children in an exciting way, to bring them to the next level. And today, through mechanical means and through the internet, etc., that every child has a telephone or a means of communication, you can influence their lives more than you can imagine on any level. And so let's talk for a moment about today's day, the Rebbe. That's what we talk about, the passage of leadership from the previous Rebbe, 1950, to the Rebbe who took the official position in 1951. But as we know, on a spiritual level, his presence already represented leadership from the moment the previous Rebbe passed. As our prophets tell us, the sun sets and the sun rises. Immediately, God does not allow us to have a period of time without proper leadership. And that brings us later to a question of what happens today in our own times and how do we deal with it, so to speak. So the Rebbe at this time takes on this leadership that is a monumental level of leadership that is unsurpassed and heretofore unprecedented in the Jewish world, definitely since the Rambam Maimonides, and even till Moshe Rabbeinu, you might say, that the entire world is aware of the influence and philosophy and thinking of this singular leader of the Jewish people. And as we know that every generation has leadership, and very extraordinary leadership and necessary leadership, as does every generation. However, there are certain generations that surpass their trajectory. Some generation goes from one generation to the next. There's a big person generation at the end of the 20th century, and the end of the 21st century, the 15th, 19th century. There's generations, there's great men, you walk through them, all kinds of Rebbes, leaders, yadis, etc., etc. But then there are millennial generational giants. They come around every 1,000 years. There are millennial people because they impact the entire world in a different way, like the Rambam. And the Rebbe is of that same caliber. So we are fortunate that we are living in a generation where the aperture to looking at our world, the way to look at this world, which is the most complicated world that we've ever lived in, with the most potential polarizations and extremes, as we can see today, and with knowledge that surpasses our capacity, our bandwidth of intellect does not contain the ability to capture the amount of information that's available to the world. That's how much information there is. And there's still, with all the information, there's no clarity about the most basic issues in life, such as health, etc. So the Rebbe was like a light, like a lantern on the coast of the rocky shore that gave us and gives us a perspective of looking at the world in a different way. A transformative process, a way that's relevant to today in a critical way. Talk about the Rebbe, describe him. The Rebbe said to someone who said about the previous Rebbe, he said to the Rebbe, I knew your father-in-law. So the Rebbe said, you saw him, but you didn't know him. To know the Rebbe is not within our capacity, outside of the limits of you and I. I can probably challenge most people that are listening to this process in the same way. Different level, different capacity, different dimension, communicating with supernatural realities, interacting with souls, different level. So to describe the Rebbe would be very superfluous, especially as it would take a long time and there is no description. To give the Rebbe plaudits, what should we tell him? He's a great man. He had a great organization. He touched a lot of Jews. He transformed our view of the world. So to give him plaudits also, or to acknowledge him. All these matters are peripheral to the Rebbe's position, his role, and his personality, and what the Rebbe is to us. So what is the Rebbe? So practically speaking, the Rebbe transformed the Jewish identity in a remarkable way. At the moment when Jewish identity, when Jewish self-pride was at their lowest level, assimilation, questions of God, getting up from the embers of the worst Holocaust tragedy in recorded history ever. The Jews were sitting on the debris of a charred, broken world. They needed a leadership that was extraordinary because the times was extraordinary. And the Rebbe came about and he implanted in the Jew a sense of power and self-awareness and pride and identity and a knowledge of what their role is in our reality, in our history. And though the Rebbe himself, as Chassidus, demands internalization, it's what you behave inside. Doesn't matter what you look on the outside. The inside is the most important. How you feel, how you think, how you talk, how you emote. Nonetheless, the Rebbe was very careful and talked about the impact of external visualization of Jewish identity. As he told to a number of people, including my grandfather, who was an emissary of the Rebbe for certain reasons. And he would go to certain towns twice a year on behalf of the Rebbe. One of the directions that he would go to was Tennessee. He went to Nashville and Chattanooga. My grandfather did not speak one word of English. When he had a bank account that he used to give Bachram loans, I was the one that made the bank account because he couldn't do it in the bank, etc. And he would get on a bus, and he would go by bus to Chattanooga. And he would sit in the shul most of the day. And his cousin, he had a cousin there that would introduce him to a few people that had a close contact thought process of Chabad. And they would support the private elements of the Rebbe. This was called Maimid, special kind of a collection that the Rebbe did not take money from everybody. So one day my grandfather said to him, I go away for a few weeks. He hated leaving Crown Heights because he always davened with the Rebbe. So he said to my grandfather said, what am I doing over there? I go there and I can't even talk to most of the people. Some people still speak Yiddish because they're older people. Otherwise, I can't even speak to them. I'm in shul half a day. They have a tough time feeding me. Oh, I won't go. Send some. The Rebbe said, you walk down the street and some guy's looking out the second floor window from his office. And he sees you walking down the street and he sees an image of the Zayda. And all of a sudden something wakes up in him. What's that once something wakes up in him? So when we learn the Rebbe's Maimer, which is a state of the world address, what his objective is, what my mission is, on that Maimer, he actually accepted leadership for world Jewry. That's not a joke. To take upon your shoulders everybody's personal issue, everybody's personal problem like your own. And then the world issues like your own, whether it's Israel, whether it's any country in the world, whether it's Russia, literally. So the Rebbe was about to take on this massive role, which, it's not a 4-year presidency or an 8-year presidency. This is a life mission of being a leader to the Jewish people. I remember Mr. Rohr said to me many times that his role of the Rebbe, he doesn't want to hear any miracles of the Rebbe. I don't need to hear any miracles of the Rebbe. Don't tell me miss miracles, health miracles, I don't need to hear miracles of the Rebbe. The fact that the Rebbe saved Russian Jewry, practically, there's no bigger miracle than that. So there's so many factors about that. So what's the Rebbe's fundamental underlying position? His underlying position is that you and me, and every guy out there, and the Alter Rebbe calls him someone who's a real lightweight Jew, Kal Shebekalim. He calls him maybe even a transgressing Jew, Haich Yisrael. He doesn't do mitzvahs. He's not connected. He doesn't want to be connected. So what does it say about that man? So the Rebbe quotes in this first treatise, in his statement, in the state of the world address, so to speak, in his acceptance talk for being the Rebbe, that the essence of God Almighty himself, think about that. Now you talk about today with artificial intelligence And you talk about physics and astrophysics and the multiverse and metaverse, etc. Think about creator, the origin of creation. If you believe in creation, that you're not an evolutionist that doesn't believe in the soul. But if you believe in the Eibishter, you believe in God, you believe in creation, that the essence of creation, this energy power that makes everything work, is dynamically and personally and essentially connected with this guy that's a lightweight. And not only is connected with him, but he enlivens him. He gives him life force. And sometimes, after the animal instinct is somehow satiated, or the animal instinct is broken through some kind of a charge, when he sees a Jew that looks like his grandfather, that tiny element of holiness, it erupts inside of him and lights him up for that moment. And you never know how far that goes. So the Rebbe actually, in the same process, I'm not sure what my timing is here. So maybe some of the professionals will chime in for a minute and tell me, or give me some note. In the philosophy structure, in general, not Jewish philosophy, the process has been generally that there's early parts of knowledge. The earliest time of scientific information were alchemists. And they believed all their system. I'm not going to go describing what they are, these alchemists. And then after the alchemists, first they were idolaters, but not idolaters, real idolaters. How can you say Abraham Avinu's father was an idolater? So forth. That there was such a thing as the golden calf. This was not like idolatry like you see today. A guy is bowing down to some piece of stone that he doesn't know what he's doing. These people were recognized, maybe the presence of God. There's all kinds of philosophies, etc., high-level philosophies. But nonetheless, then came alchemists, and then came mechanical science, Newtonian science, etc., all kinds of philosophies. Then came physics, nuclear science, etc. Then came astrophysics, then came metaphysics, and that all continued to refine matter. And as a result of the refining of matter, they also found a refinement of energy. And energy became more potent from the smallest sources because the atom, the splitting of the atom that causes the dynamic atom bomb or hydrogen bomb, they are at the source of matter. So they started to discover that in terms of the physicality of mass and matter, mass and energy. Now, can you imagine that the same evolution takes place in the Jewish, in the spiritual side? In understanding. In the Jewish perspective of understanding Jewishness, the philosophy system of the Kuzari, which is basically mechanical, and the philosophy system of the Rambam in Meir Nevuchim, which basically speaks to logic, is completely different than the philosophy system of Kabbalah that addresses a whole different subconsciousness. Already there's a reality of the subconscious. Already it's a reality of that which is not tangible and physical. That's called like whatever the Higgs boson or the singularity or whatever they may call it, or the epigene. The Rebbe came in onto this process and gave us a language. But it was not just a language of philosophy. Because as the Rebbe said, the difference between science and philosophy is that, science and Torah, is that science does not demand behavior. The highest level scientists in the secular world, I don't want to get into their names or discussions, they don't believe in the soul. Evolutionists don't believe in the soul. So the information that you have is not simply that knowledge. It has to also be true knowledge, has to have what can you do for it? What does it demand? What's the action part of it? Without action, it has no meaning. In fact, the most credible, positive, and definitive aspect of the development of human behavior is behavior, of human consciousness behavior. It affects how you think, it affects how you feel. Behavior, consistent behavior, has that power. So the Rebbe took these deepest levels of philosophies and completely integrated them with Torah, and showed how Torah speaks through these aspects. And when God created these scientific advances, it wasn't just all of a sudden there's something new in the world science. Let's see how it fits with Torah. No, it just gives us more, so to speak, tangibility to be able to understand how far the Torah reaches. When someone once asked the Rebbe, because he was criticizing him, how could the Rebbe have gone to schools, to non-Jewish schools to learn college, university? The Rebbe went to high-level universities. How could the Rebbe have gone to university? The Rebbe said, first of all, the question is not about me. You can ask the question about the Vilna Gaon. So just because the man meant to ask it in a very negative way. But he says, secondly, there's two ways of learning secular information. There's ways of learning secular information to give credibility to secular information, then seeing how it fits into the Torah. And then there's learning secular information to see how Torah influences everything that's in secular information. It just happens to be, not because I'm so smart, because I learned a little chassidus, that when they come up with these new ideas, these extraordinary breakthroughs in thinking, in terms of what the world's made up, I've said, oh boy, they're finally catching up to us. We got it. The Rebbe gave language to a time like today where our lives are becoming a metaverse. And the Rebbe's language allows us to be able to have experientially, to understand and to feel all those categories. But when you talk about the Rebbe, the most important things about the Rebbe is every talk he ended was with practicality and action. So you take a look at the paradigm shifts that the Rebbe made in Jewish thinking. So you see the power of leadership, the power of influence, and the Jewish empowerment that comes from it. In 1952, 2 years after the Rebbe took on his role, the Rebbe established the women's group of Israel, and a year later, the women's group of America. He established an active women's group in terms of being outreach people. The Rebbe coined a word that was never used before. There's such a thing as a shliach. Shliach means an emissary. But a woman generally cannot be a shliach in terms of legal matters. But the Rebbe coined the word shlucha. She is an emissary. Because the Rebbe said every Jewish woman is an emissary of Almighty God to utilize her capacity, her influence, her abilities, her potential to influence the world around her. And because of modesty, Almighty God made it that men have that capacity to influence the men, and the women have the capacity to influence the women and serve as role models. That was such an amazing breakthrough, if you can think of it, that a person of the caliber of the Rebbe, Hasidic Rebbe, should open the door to women on such a level of leadership that the secular world has not even done that. That's on one simple level of Jewish life. Take a look at secular life. For those of you who may remember, I know this was a very good friend of Rabbi J.J. Hecht. He was very influential in her life. And I think possibly he was the one that brought her to the Rebbe. But there was a congresswoman, the first Black congresswoman in America. And she was from Brooklyn. Her name was Shirley Chisholm. First Black congresswoman is a big deal. So in Congress, the Southern Democrats, so to speak, they have to be nice guys, so they have to give her a position, first Black congresswoman. So what can they do with a congresswoman from Brooklyn? What is in Brooklyn? Brooklyn is a town of business, of factories, of work, of banks, etc. It's not an agricultural environment. But they had to give her a position, but they didn't want to give her too much of a position in those years. So they gave her a position in the Department of Agriculture. She was on the Agriculture Committee. So she came to the Rebbe. And she said to the Rebbe, they put me in this Agriculture Committee. What should I do? So the Rebbe said, Agriculture Committee, fantastic. God put you there for a reason. There's so much poverty in America. And in the Agriculture Department, they throw out so much wheat and food every year that if you transform that into giving people food, it would be such an impact And the Rebbe began the program of food stamps right there with Shirley's chisel. People don't even think about that. There's a whole book written, Social Vision, about the Rebbe's change of the world. It wasn't because the Rebbe was a sociologist or the Rebbe cared as the Jewish leader of the world, as the Meshtabin of the world. The Rebbe cared not about every single Yid in the world. He cared about every single creature in the world. And of course, every human in the world. And that's why the Rebbe is the person who cared about, he was the one that 42 years ago said to me, talked publicly and then through interaction gave me the push and the courage to work with Jewish men and women in jail and prison. Who thought about that in the 1980s? It was a non-sequitur. When we started the program in our shul, members of our community said, Rabbi, you can't have that. You can't have a rabbi that's going to work with Jewish prisoners in this kind of community. No way. The Rebbe cared about every Jew because he was a spiritual father to every Jew. And that's why he says in his treatise, you think that it's a tough spot that you're in? Life has got difficulties, the Rebbe said. It's not a bed of roses. He writes that. Don't talk yourself into butterflies in your chest. The Rebbe quoted from the previous Rebbe. This is not an easy job. It's a tough job, this job. In fact, it's a battle. It's a personal battle within each and every one of us, battling our urges, battling our entitlements, battling our attitudes, our relationships, so many things that we have to battle with on a regular basis, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, materially, whatever. Rebbe said that battle is an ongoing battle and you're going to win that battle. The thing is, God gives you the capacity. He calls you the army of Hashem. This is a battle that you can win. And the Rebbe stresses it. Well, what's the underlying factor? After he gives the whole philosophical system of understanding how this world was created, and God, he says, God is coming back to his original place. This, you and me, are his original space. We are his bridal chamber. That's what the Master says, his bridal chamber, God's bridal chamber. He's coming back to his bridal chamber that you and me create. And the method we created is not because we're so perfect, it's because we transform the foolishness of folly, the mistakes that come through foolishness. We transform them to being boards that build a temple that becomes a dwelling place for Hashem. That's the process. The Rebbe explained in his first treatise stories of each Rebbe, how they dedicated themselves not to their philosophical systems, not to analyze the deepest levels of God's presence, but how they did a favor for another Jew, how they were touched by another Jew's pain, how they were there for another Jew's assistance, because love of a fellow Jew is the primary aspect. I know I can tell you that from our situation here in Surfside with the collapse. There was no language that I knew how to tell them, nothing that I learned. I couldn't tell them anything in Nidla or in Hasidus. It's just not a time for talking for that. There's nothing to do. We could not console these people because what do you console them? I'm sorry that you passed away. Don't tell me that they're still alive, till the last, still a few weeks later, everybody was thinking they're alive. And you couldn't say, don't worry, they're coming back, because you knew that the Derech HaTava in nature, that was a very difficult thing. So what allowed them to live through this extremely unbelievable horror was just the concept of kindness, of loving a fellow person unconditionally, which means so many things in Jewish life. Someone just giving a talk here, a Rabbi comments on positivity. The Rebbe never said a negative thing about somebody. He didn't say a person's not a good person. He said the person's not behaving like Jacob, who was a perfect person. He never said the word bad. He said not good. The Rebbe always looked at the most positive aspects of another human being. He didn't look at the human being in his error. He looked at the human being in his potential and how painful the soul must feel having lived through an action that's so detrimental to the soul and he's not even aware of it, the guy. Imagine. So the Rebbe gave us the impetus for loving a fellow Jew. And he said that there's three loves the previous Rebbe that was given. And the three loves he said he has to put on is, it's selfless. When the previous Rebbe's father gave him his leadership, he said to him, dark clouds are sweeping over this area, and they will become darker. What will be demanded of you is selflessness. Not only selflessness materially, but selflessness spiritual, and actual selflessness materially. And you know the previous Rebbe was on death row. And there were three factors in his life, three things: love of God, love of Torah, love of Israel. And if a person lacked the love of Israel, he said once, it's not that he loves God and he loves Torah and he doesn't love Israel. It means he does not love God and Torah, because it's impossible to love one without the other. So the fact of the matter is that we have our mission before us. And I applaud the Central Agency of Jewish Furtherance of Jewish Education, and it's the FJE, that I worked with in those years that I was a partner or a teacher, a bacher in the release time program. I encourage it 100%, and it fulfills the Rebbe's mission, and it wakes us individually up to what each of us is responsible for. We should know that there are 10 children out there at least, that if you don't participate in supporting to help those children wherever you are in these programs, then you'll be called to task for why didn't you do it. But the Rebbe was the kindest person in the world. I would be scared every time I walked by the Rebbe, because I would think to myself, oh my God, he's going to see everything I did in the last month or the last 3 weeks, whatever happened. And he's going to see this and this, and I didn't do this well enough, et cetera, et cetera. And I would walk up to the Rebbe shaking and shivering, and I would walk by him, and I came out, I was like soaring on heaven. But the Rebbe would lift me up completely. The Rebbe was extremely demanding, but he's extremely loving. And he continues to give us extraordinary power, because his Talkus does not mean to leave us and to enter into a different space. It means to elevate it to a higher level. And that higher level is accessible to each of us. So Chaim, Tzlacha Rabbe, we should all Yisrael Hashem to be with us materially and down in this physical space.